What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? John here with you. It is Thursday, December 23rd. You may be wondering why I'm choosing to make this video now, and it's pretty simple here. There was a sale on the PlayStation Store as far as the front end of Sega Genesis Classics. It was $10. I never really finished the first Shining Force. I know that's blasphemy for a lot of you to end up hearing, because I did complete Shining Force 2 on the Sega Genesis when it was out in 1994. Never got around the original game. And I do have the Game Boy Advance remake of this game. Never got around to beating that as well. But I'm going to sit down, I'm going to play this game, I'm going to finish it, and I'm going to try to leave some thoughts about it. And that's what I'm going to end up doing here before we get into Christmas Eve and Christmas. So I hope everybody has a great holiday and everybody takes care of all the stuff that's still going on around there. But I'm not going to get into all that right now. So, Shining Force, Legacy of Great Intention, released in 1993 by Sega and Sonic Software Planning, Camelot. This is an excellent game. If you hadn't played it before, you probably had a chance, like I said, with the collections being released all the way from Dreamcast to current consoles now. You've probably played it before. But what separated Shining Force from all its other constituents is it was the first of its kind for the most part. I know, granted, probably if you had Commodore games or you had working computers and things like that, maybe you played Ultima or some of the other things like that, Wizardry. There might have been some other things that were kind of similar. I know they're turn-based RPGs, but there probably was a couple strategy RPGs out there before that. And especially if you were in the Japanese market, you did play Landgreiser on the Sega Genesis, or you did play Fire Emblem on the NES. And that kind of preceded some of that stuff going on right now. So, for Shining Force in 1993 on the Sega Genesis or the Mega Drive, however you end up playing it in the United States or Europe, it was really good because it's one of those games. It was the first of its kind. You had a leader, and then you had 11 other units, up to 11 other units. When you got more units, you can add them as you go along, ranging from your hero, who was a well-rounded character, to your warriors that could handle damage on the front lines, to your knights that had a lot of HP and can move on horseback, to your archers that could attack from farther away. You also had clerics to be able to heal, which is kind of like a Final Fantasy White Mage, and then your wizards and sorcerers like a Final Fantasy Black Mage, and then you had a mix of flying units, dragons, robots, ninjas, things like that to all round out your force. And which was cool is you can kind of combine your 12 units as you see fit to get you through the best parts of the battlefield and kind of figure out your terrain and lay of the land, because every single unit that you had particular strengths and weaknesses, and also depending on the maps, whether they would be wide open, which would be good for the knights or your flying units, or foresty areas and mountains where your flying units would take most principle, and in the foresty areas and mountains your archers and everything else would be able to do more. So it was good of you to work on all of your units and try to get a foothold on the strengths and weaknesses of your team, and that's what made it fun. But also, for those that really did love the combat in Shining Force, you could also have your hero just cast an egress spell and then go back to the main stage and kind of just do the fighting over to go ahead and get some level ups and things like that. So, as Shining Force, a story like that, a strategy RPG, there isn't much to speak of. I always name the main character my name, but in this instance, Max gets washed up on shore. He's kind of lost all his memory and things like that. Pretty much what he's going to end up doing is saving Gardania from Runefast and Cain and Dark Soul and all of that, and stop them from waking up the great dragon that's going to doom the world. And that's pretty much all there is. There really isn't much of a story as far as the Shining Force games have always been told, but in this series in particular, from the Shining Force series, I know there's a lot of other Shining games that we will get to here, but from this particular series, the mishmash of your units against other units and turn-based combat like that is ultimately fun. It goes from turn to turn to turn. You kind of position your units in the right ways to take advantages of their strengths and weaknesses, get away from the other units, long-range attacks or spells and things like that. And it's pretty addictive. It's really damn good, and it's one of the first of its kind. So, again, the combat is what ultimately made this game great, and the mix of characters ultimately made this game great, too. So going forward from this Shining series, you had Shining Force 2, which was a direct sequel in 1994 that I ultimately believe improves on the original in every single way possible, all the way from, more tighter, more fun combat animations, excellent music that's definitely been up a few notches with a lot more memorable tracks, a lot more characters to choose from. Combat is definitely as good as it's ever been at that point. And then it kind of fell apart after a few more years. Because yes, you had Shining Force 3, but that was on the Sega Saturn, and a lot of you between that time, you either had a PlayStation or a Sega Saturn. Sega Saturn was an excellent console, but Shining Force 3 initially was a three-part series, but we didn't know that at the time. One of the parts got released in the United States, and I believe that was the first part, but the other two were left in Japan, so we never got a chance to play Shining Force 3. And I probably played Shining Force 3 like a lot of you. I had a cousin that had a Sega Saturn, and I couldn't find the initial game, much like I couldn't find the initial game for this Shining Force that you're seeing right now on the Mega Drive, because every time I would look in the Sega Visions magazine, if you remember those back in the day, this game was always like $150, $200 just between like 1996 and 97 if you want to go ahead and order that. I never was able to pay that price being a kid. So never really got to play that much. The initial Shining Force I would rent from a Blockbuster, and it has a battery backup. But my battery backup from any game that I ever played never really seemed to work. Shining Force 1, I play it, I go to bed, get up the next day, everything is gone. Battery backup's not good. You gotta take one of those little silver coins or whatever that they are, just like in the Sega Saturn, to put that in the back there to get more memory, or fix the clock, or anything else like that doesn't work, with a little backup RAM. When I had the Shining Force 2 cart, mine was pretty faulty. I was able to beat the game and not have it delete, but the second time I went to go back and play that game, the witch from the top of it, Cinema Follows, deleted and scared the shit out of me with the music. So that didn't work out too well. And as I was getting to the point of Shining Force 3, a lot of you probably never got a chance to play that game because it was incredibly rare if you didn't go ahead and pick it up right when it came out. And the other two parts, like I said, we didn't get. So unless you owned a Sega Saturn, or you did some stuff through emulation, or you're able to download the game and then use a backup RAM, because what I did was I had one of his Sega Saturns, had a backup thing installed so you can play backup discs and then play a backup of Shining Force, and then get the rest of the other two on 3 in an English translation and try to play it that way. But it's about time that I was able to play the game legally, and it's about time that Sega, I think at this point, gets off their ass and releases these 3 Shining Force parts for Shining Force 3, because I really want to get back and play to it. I want to play it legitimately. I would love to be able to do that. As far as some of the other stuff that's in the series, you had the Game Gear games, and I don't think we got all the Game Gear games as well, because the only other one that I remember that I had on the Game Gear was Sword of Hijah. And I don't know if that was a prequel, or you guys can help me in the comments section with all of that stuff, because I played 2, finished it. I played Sword of Hijah tethered to the wall outlet for my Sega Game Gear, because if you had batteries in it for about 2 hours, you had your 6 AA batteries, and they were all dead in about 2 hours. But it was nice to have a system with full color and backlight. Loved the Game Gear, but you couldn't really play that unless you were tethered to the wall outlet. So that's a brief history of the Shining Force series. You had 1, 2, 3. The first 2 on the Mega Drive, Sega Genesis. The third game on the Sega Saturn, released in one part, even though there was 3, all 3 in Japanese. First part in the United States. And then you had some of the Game Gear games, which I know Sword of Hijah came out here, but I don't think Final Conflict or Gaiden or any of those other ones came out. So, which was cool about this game at the time was not only did you have the battles, but you could traverse through towns. You could get your weapons and stuff like that, but you could talk to the townsfolk and kind of progress along as you went through the story. Now, this game was based off of a chapter system, as Shining Force 2 was a little more open. I'm not going to sit here and say it was an open world game, but it was a little more open that you can go ahead and do a little bit more exploring, and there was a lot more secrets and things to find. In fact, even in the second one, which I think is a little bit superior. I do love the first game, but the second one, You could have secret characters. You could take some of your other characters and combine them to get different promotions. Like this game, if you reach level 10, your character can be promoted, with the max being level 20 before you promote them. Once you promote them, they become a lot more powerful. They start at level 1 again, but they'll level up faster, going up against the harder enemies, and then they just become extremely powerful. And within 2 and the sequels and things like that, it just got a little bit more crazy. If you played the handheld game on the Game Gear, the Master System, or whatever you want to call it, but the Game Gear, if you played it on that, it was all battles, and there was no town traversal, just like the one on Sega CD, where it was Shining Force CD. There was no town traversals. CD had wonderful music, being on a CD, but you didn't have any of the town traversal. So, brief history of the Force series explained, but it's kind of gone away. As you know, you had Shining the Holy Ark, I think that was on the Sega Saturn. You had Shining Force turn into Shining Force Exa, which was an action RPG that was okay on the PlayStation 2, but then as you went along and you had Shining Force Refrain, I think, released on the PlayStation 4, which was absolute dog crap. It's been a long time since this series has had any versatility and foothold. There's going to be a Final Fantasy Tactics remade from PlayStation 1 to recent consoles now. I don't know if it's just like PS4 and onward. That's going to be coming out. It'd be nice to see if this game can get remade and all of that stuff be done, because the last Shining Force game that we officially got that was like this was the remake on Game Boy Advance in the very early 2000s. So it was just like this game, but expanded with a little more lines from your main character, a card system that you can get from relationships and things like that, and if you completed a battle within so many turns, you would get extra items and weapons and things like that. So what do you think? Facebook.com/TBUGunslinger, Twitter @JohnRyanOtt. Was Shining Force for the Sega Genesis Mega Drive one of your first forays into strategy RPGs, or was it Fire Emblem? Fire Emblem is a little bit harder than this, because when your characters die, they die forever. In Shining Force, they do not. But I thought this was an excellent game, and hopefully, as we get along here, I know I'm going to have these other games, like I said, for Christmas, between Marvel Guardians of the Galaxy, Scarlet Nexus, Yakuza Like a Dragon, and Lost Judgment. I will be getting to those first, but I'm glad I was able to knock this one out, because I think at some point, now that I can make these videos, on this side having it for the PS5, I can do something on Shining Force 2 rather than playing on an emulator. I can play it on here. But all these games do run great, and there is a little fast forward feature here. If you do end up getting the classics one, I wouldn't pay more than $10 because that's what I got on sale for. You can hold the R2 button on the PS4, PS5 to do a little fast forward when you're doing some of these fights to just get some of the stuff done. So what did you think about it? Now, before we end up closing this video, I also want to talk about a little character tier list as far as some of the other stuff between 2 and 3 and onward. Now, in the initial Shining Force, you have your hero, and usually your hero is a really good all-around tanky character, and it's definitely the truth in this game. But there's also like 7 other knights to use. There's a lot of knights. There's too many. Between Ken, May, Arthur, Ernest, Vankar, Pell, there is too many. So if you want to talk about like knights, they have good movement forward on open terrain and get by horseback and can attack with a spear or a lance, lance 1 and spear 2 spaces. If you want to use some of the best knights, I would suggest, if you're going to use 2, probably use May and use Pell. Those are probably the 2 best ones. Arthur does get a lot of magic, but I would put Arthur toward the back end as far as the character tier list. He is pretty good if you level him up. If you do a lot of power leveling, you'll notice he'll get some spells, but you get him a little bit later in the game, and he's significantly weaker from Pell, especially, who powers through your whole team, and then May, I think, just to mix it up here and have a male-female counterpart for the knights. I like both of them. As far as your warriors, you really only get 2, and they're both kind of the same. You either have a older palette swap in Gort or Luke that get like heavy axes and things like that. They're frontline guys. They can't move a lot of space, but they can definitely do a lot of damage. Gort and Luke are probably, between, let's just say S, A, B, C, D, F. something like that. They'll definitely be in your high B tier range. They're always really good. Now, here's the other instances. Let's say you have 5 main units. You always have, let's just power it like this for S rankings. If you have your main unit, which is your main character, he's always going to be in there. I don't think he's the greatest character, but he's definitely an A. He's probably a step below like the best. So the two best ones, in my opinion, in the game, bar none, are your two wizards, sorceresses. You have Teo, who you start with the red hair that has fire spells, and you have Henri that you get later in the game. And yes, I understand, again, if you level all of them up toward the end of the game, they can become the best of the best of the best. But with Teo's fire spells, she's really damn good. With Henri's freeze spells, she's really damn good. When you unlock Blaze 4 and Freeze 4, it's lights out for everybody. it's instant death. As you see Teo there in the ultimate form, she's really, really good. Henri's really, really good. I think they're two of the best. I love using them. And then Blue, that's another one of those ones. We'll get forward to that as well. So those are kind of your sorcerers out of the way. Aleph, you get a little late. Leave her in the D tier. Don't care about them. Now, this is something that's different to me. After you get through your priests, you have Chris, you have Lo, who you start with, and I think you have Gonzo toward like the end of the game, which again, it's very at the end of the game. Don't even worry about him. Between Lo, you might not think he's all that great, and he's really not. He's not all that great, but it's one of the healers that you have from the very beginning, so it's probably going to be leveled. Chris, who you get shortly after that, is really, really good. Chapter 2, you use her a lot. You get that aura spell to be able to heal multiple units. She's great, especially when you need a healer. But here's a couple other things. You start getting into the flying units and your archers. These are very, very important. Your archers that you start with, especially Hans. You get Diane a little bit later, and you get Lo toward the end of the game. Don't sleep on your archers. I understand from the very beginning of the game they may not have a lot of attack, but as you get some of the better weapons, and you get the buster shot at the end of the game that shoots like a freaking nuclear explosion, your archers are wonderful. They attack from 3 spaces. No, they don't get a lot of HP, and they're meant to be left in the back, but if you level them up just a little bit, they'll carry you toward the end of the game, being able to attack from other avenues and areas that certain players just can't get to. Certain units just can't get to on your team. Don't sleep on your archers. And then your flying units at the very end, whether they be Balboy, Amon, who are your birdmen, or you get Kokichi, who's a kind of a secret flying unit, who's like an older flying lancer, or you get Blue, a grand dragon, a baby dragon that morphs into a grand dragon. Your flying units are awesome, especially in this game when you have a lot of maps that are mountains, trees, where everyone else is having a tough time getting around. Blue, I think, is one of my favorite ones in the game. A dragon that flies around and shoots fire and lightning. Use your flying units, use your archers, use your mages. You're pretty well set. You have a healer on the side with maybe a couple of knights, 1 or 2 knights, and your main character. That's pretty much the 12 characters that you want to use. So, long story short, Max probably A rank. I put May probably in the high B unit for one of the other knights you want to use. Pal in the S range. Henri Teo in the S range. Blue definitely in a high A S range. Those are the ones you kind of want to stick around with. Your archers, I know they're probably in the C or B range, but they're definitely really good toward the end of the game. And then just stay away from Aleph, Gonzo, some of the other knights that you don't need to use. And your main laugh joke character, Yogurt, who's kind of the mascot of Shining Force. So that was a brief history of the game, a character tier list, some of my thoughts on the game and what it meant to me being one of the first strategy RPG experiences. Shining Force is great. Hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about Shining Force 2 in length, because when we get to that point, I'm just going to really talk about the game and tell you why I think it's so good. Peace out, guys. Have a great day and have a great holiday and Merry Christmas.